music down. Hi everybody, we're still working on getting all this stuff switched over, so we have this weird chopped off look. Welcome to Mirror Darkly, Unbridled Inquiry. This is Robin, I'm Ruth, and we want to welcome you guys. Today's topic is how to think more clearly, or ways to think more clearly, and we need our little banner. And anyway, we do want to tell you that next week we're not sure if we're going to be here. So if you follow the Mirror Darkly Facebook page, that will you'll be able to get notifications about if we're going to be here or not. If we suddenly disappear, it's because the electricity is a little unstable. Not only do we have massive fires coming over the hill into the Antelope Valley, but we're having like thunderstorms. So it's a weird combination of stuff outside. It's incredibly muggy. The smoke is billowing up into the thunder clouds, so you can't tell what's thunder clouds, what's smoke. It smells like hot, wet alfalfa out there. So it's kind of like being on a farm on a hot summer or rainy day, like when you get those sun showers. When we were back east, you get those sun showers and all those critter smells come out. So it smells like a giant critter outside. But anyway, so if we do disappear all of a sudden, thank you for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you next week. So, but anyway, so
yeah, we'd had a brownout at home, so
yeah,
that's why
we lost internet for a little while, and some of the traffic lights were out on the way here. So just so you know, if we disappear, that's what's going on. So anyway, so you want to? Oh, wait a minute. Before we do that, please comment or ask questions in the comment section wherever you're listening from. We are on YouTube and on Facebook. So if you have any questions, any comments, if you have an idea for another show, because we will happily move our calendar back and do your topic for our next show. So just let us know. We are going to do comments and questions. We're doing segments. So at the end of the first segment, I will read any comments or questions, and then we'll do that way all through the show. So I set my timer. So while you're introducing, I'm going to set my watch.
Okay. Well, thinking clearly is not really all that difficult, but it's something that people oftentimes fail to accomplish. And there are some things to be aware of that can help. And once you hear the various things, it's kind of like, well, yeah, that makes sense. But it's not necessarily things that you would automatically do or think to do. Important aspect of being able to think clearly is to recognize that there are any number of things that can prevent you from doing so, and that frequently in anybody's life we will fail to think very clearly. Proverbs 3 verse 5 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." And that phrase, "do not lean on your own understanding," is a useful one to keep in mind at all times, along with what it says in verse 7, "Do not be wise in your own eyes." Socrates was considered the wisest of all men because he affirmed that he knew nothing. And that's a good starting place. That is, if you imagine at any point in your life that you know it all, you don't know much of anything at all, because you can't possibly know it all. Tony was just talking, one of our middle daughter was talking to us today, and she expressed that she has found certain coworkers that they're fresh out of college and they imagine that they know everything they need to know about doing the job that they have now, and they don't need to be instructed by underlings, God forbid, despite the fact that they really don't understand what's going on. And as Ruth pointed out, a phrase that I'll use commonly, if you have left college and you think that you don't have anything more to learn, that you've learned everything, then your education has completely failed.
Yeah. Well, and it's not even, Tony's not her underling. She's being trained for that job. So
Right.
they're really equals. But because Tony's still in the position of being a trainee, it sort of makes her an underling a little bit. But this is a person who is going to be a colleague, and to treat her that way is
Weird.
weird and not wise.
No.
So,
You know, one of the things somebody else has suggested, I forget who now, that to get an idea of the character of an individual, see how they treat people that are not on the same social level with them. That is, how do they treat the wait staff at restaurants? How do they treat people at the checkout stands, at stores, things like that. Particularly how they treat people that can't do anything for them, per se. And that tells you a lot about where they are.
also how they treat family members too, like
Yes.
a good indicator when looking at marrying someone is how do they treat their parent that's of the gender that you are. So like if you're marrying a guy and how does he treat his mother, that's pretty much how he's going to treat you. So if he's disrespectful and snarky and won't do things for her, that's probably how you're going to end up getting treated eventually when the honeymoon is over. Are you beeping?
Yeah.
Which of our children doesn't know that we're doing a webcast? Oh, it was
Oh, it's
motion at the front door. Okay, sorry. It was just,
You know, I said on vibrate, so
yeah.
supposedly it's supposed to interrupt us less that way.
But watching how people treat others is a really good indication of the kind of person that they are.
Yeah.
And Jesus even said, as you've done unto the least of these, you've done unto me.
Right.
That's why I like the book Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters. It's an African Cinderella story, but it also has that underlying truth in it. She goes through all these things and meets up with all these different people that she has to help, and she doesn't understand why she's going through all this. And then at the end, Mufaro tells her that he was all those people. He was the old woman and whoever it was. I haven't read the book in years, but so she treated him well because she treated these other beings well. That I think some were animals, but he had actually in the story turned himself into those things. But Jesus is making the point that the way that you treat, the homeless, the widows, the fatherless, the poor, and people that may work for you that that are under you in your job description, or if you have people that work at your house like a gardener or a housekeeper or the person that does your hair, because I need one. How do you treat those people? If you're dismissive and all that, then that's not a good thing.
Right. And it comes back to not assuming that you're all that in a bag of chips. Humility is an important aspect of learning how to think clearly, because you recognize how limited your understanding is or ever can be, and how easy it is to make mistakes, to think something's a certain way and come to realize, wait, I was missing this whole set of information, and that completely changes the character of what I thought I was dealing with. And so as you're researching something, as you're trying to find out whether or not something is true, these are things to keep in mind. A lot of humility and a lot of skepticism and self-doubt. That's the other thing, that one of the key rules of thumb, and it's very difficult to do, but it's something that was early discovered and contributed to the scientific revolution, was realization that you should put as much weight or be as skeptical about things that support your point of view as you would be about things that attack your point of view. See, there's a tendency, and I see this all the time on Facebook, people uncritically will post something that supports their preferred narrative, their preferred beliefs, without bothering to check to see whether or not that thing is actually true or not. they would not so cavalierly post something like that if it was something that was attacking or contradicting what they claim they believe. And the difficulty is that just because it tastes good, just because it seems to fit what you believe, does not mean that that it's necessarily true, because you might be wrong. And you need to check and see what's the context of the information. Did this actually happen? Be very skeptical about anything that supports your point of view.
There was a meme that was on Facebook this morning, and I was glad I waited and really read through it, because so it has to do with the little boy that was shot by the neighbor, the little boy on his bike, and the question is out there, and I've been asked the question. I even asked the question, why aren't they burning cities over this little boy? And then the comeback is, well, he's white, he was shot by a black man. But then I was thinking about it, I was like, but it's not the same as like what happened to George Floyd.
No.
Not the fact that the racial part of it, if you take out the racial part, the stories are completely different.
Right.
George Floyd died at the hands or at the knee of a police officer, and the little boy died at the hands of a neighbor
who's probably mentally disturbed,
who might have some kind of mental illness, or there's some kind of backstory. The other thing I've learned too is to not react to things right away.
Let things simmer for 24 to 48
Yes.
hours before you react.
And
Because new information comes out.
And video is not what you think it is. Just because you saw it with your own eyes doesn't mean it's true. While what happened to George Floyd is obviously a crime, it's obviously a horrible thing that happened, there's more to the story than what you just see in that one video. And body cam video is really important. Video from all different perspectives is really important. People think because, well, I saw the video, it must be true.
Well, it's like what happened to the that high school student
Yes.
that was at that incident.
Nicholas,
whatever his name was. Anyway, where the initial reports make you think that he's a complete jerk, and then come to find out that that wasn't the case. And of course, he has successfully sued now several news organizations that just assumed that he had to be the bad guy.
And treated him really
and
poorly.
treated him very poorly, which is an unfortunate thing to do to somebody who's a child in the first place. But anyway.
So, we're at the end of the segment.
Oh.
So, there was a comment that came in from JP. He's listening. Hi, JP. It says, this sounds like Robin's The One Commandment. But
Yes, that is an important aspect of all of this. That is, the thing that, as Christians, we should always keep in mind is the one verse, or the great commandment. That is, do to others as you would have them do to you, and that plays into how you handle information and do research, for that matter, because you want to do due diligence. You want to make sure that what you're saying, what you are arguing for, is actually the case to the best of your ability.
I think that empathy plays a huge part in that.
Yes.
What if you were the person who is the focus of the video? Okay, so what if you were let's not do the police officer and George Floyd. That's really,
else.
But let's say the kid with the Native American guy banging on the drum. Okay, so you're that kid. You want people to know your real story. And being so young and being grilled by all these news people, I'm sure it was mind-boggling for him, especially since his brain's not fully formed yet, and now he's got all these people against him. It's like, what did I do? And come to find out, they had toured the White House. They bought the hats or they were given the hats or something, because they toured the White House. They were told by their people that were supervising them to stay here, don't move. In my estimation, there should have been an adult there, but whatever. They were told to stay there and don't move. And then they were approached by this person who was actually being aggressive towards them. And he did what he was told. He just didn't move. He probably was smiling because he felt uncomfortable, because people will do that. When they're uncomfortable, they'll kind of smile. And so it made him look kind of snarky. But if you were that kid, how would you feel if there's a whole part of the story that nobody knows, and you're on the news, and you're being doxxed, and all these things are happening to you when all you did was follow directions. You were told to stand there. And I think that we lose that empathy, especially on social media.
Yeah.
Because we're little keyboard warriors, and I'm going to show them, I'm going to convince everybody that they're wrong.
Yes.
So I gave up that fight.
Yeah. Something that I find very interesting, this just to illustrate the importance of humility and recognizing that there's sometimes more to the story. You may not have full information. You simply could be wrong, which is a very hard thing for a lot of us to admit that, I could be mistaken in what I think and believe. I spend most of my time running scared that I am wrong all the time, which is actually a useful thing. You should be skeptical about your own infallibility. Benjamin Franklin was one of the people involved in producing our Constitution. He was part of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787. And on September 17th, 1787, after they had finished the Constitution, they'd signed it, and Benjamin Franklin is talking about it, and he says, "I confess that there are several parts of this Constitution which I do not at present approve. But I am not sure I shall never approve them, for having lived long, I have experienced many instances of being obliged by better information or fuller consideration to change opinions even on important subjects, which I once thought right but found to be otherwise. It is therefore that the older I grow, the more apt I am to doubt my own judgment, and to pay more respect to the judgment of others. Most men, indeed, as well as most sects in religion, think themselves in possession of all truth, and whatever others differ from them, it is so far error. Steele, a Protestant in a dedication, tells the Pope that the only difference between our churches and their opinions of the certainty of their doctrine is the Church of Rome is infallible, and the Church of England is never in the wrong. But though many private persons think almost as highly of their own infallibility as that of their sect, few express it so naturally as a certain French lady, who in a dispute with her sister said, 'I don't know how it happens, sister, but I meet with nobody but myself that's always in the right.'" And that, Benjamin Franklin, when he said all that, was, I think, 81 years old. Yeah, 81 years old. That he would recognize that he could be wrong in his opinions, that's pretty good. Most of us are probably not as smart as Benjamin Franklin was at 81 years of age. That is, none of us had a hand in producing the U.S. Constitution. When the complexity of a human being, part of our problem is that, for one thing, we are physical creatures, and our moods play a large role in how clearly we can think at any given point. That is, if you haven't had adequate sleep, you're not going to think as well. If you are hungry or thirsty, you're not going to think as well. If you've had 2 or 3 beers, you're probably not going to think as well. That is, there are things that impact how we think, how clearly we think, how much patience we have to deal with problems and issues. We are emotional. That is, we are not Vulcans. And really,
Live long and prosper.
yes, live long and prosper. Really, being completely free of emotions would not be a good idea either. That is, that's an extreme. One needs the balance of your emotions with your rationality. Both things need to kind of play hand in hand in order to do the job properly.
Well, Star Trek plays a lot with that idea.
Yes, they do.
Because not just Spock, who, even though he's half human and half Vulcan, he struggles with the emotional part of him. He really strives to be completely logical. But then in Star Trek Next Generation with Data, he had no emotion, and so like understanding jokes and things like that, he just, it went right past him because he was unable to have emotion. Didn't they do it in one episode? Didn't
He got an emotion chip from
okay.
Dr. Noonien Singh,
okay.
and he could turn it on.
Details this guy remembers.
He could turn it on and off.
So,
But all you see it. I mean, you see this actually in any of the, that is in Star Trek Enterprise, in the Next Generation with Data. Star Trek Enterprise, you have a Vulcan again as part of the crew. Of course, the original series, you have Mr. Spock, and they show the value of both things. That is, that both things combined is what really works well. That is, there will be choices that the Vulcans wouldn't do. For instance, I was just watching the second episode from Star Trek Enterprise last night, or the night before. In any case, they come across a ship that had been attacked and all the crew had been murdered. And it was an unknown species. And the Vulcan on the ship tells Captain Archer that, no, the Vulcans wouldn't have even bothered stopping because it's a dead ship, nobody's there, why bother? And then the other issue is, once they go there, they find out these people have been attacked, murdered, and their vital fluids are being drained for some unknown reason. The Vulcans would just leave because, well, the bad guys may come back and attack, and who wants to be there when that happens?
right.
The human response to things is somewhat different because of the emotions involved. They're thinking just in terms of what's the most logical sort of behavior, while we're thinking in terms of, well, you know, if this was us, we'd appreciate it if somebody would let us know that, you know, our ship has been attacked, these people are dead, you might want to collect the bodies and let the next of kin know what has happened, that sort of thing. So, entirely different way of looking at things from the two, and that's what we as human beings are. We've got both of those things in us, which of course is kind of the point of what Star Trek is doing.
I think that I think the main emotion that gets in the way of us changing an idea that we've always held to be true, when it's challenged and then we think, maybe I was wrong, maybe I should switch to this new idea, is that emotion right there is pride.
Right.
Like, what's that statement? And that settles it. What's the beginning part of that?
Oh, God said it, I believe it, and that.
Yeah, and that settles it.
And that's the problem with that is, do you really know that this is what God said? That is, do you understand what it is that is being said? You get the context, you have full understanding of things and how it fits into the entire corpus of Scripture. And we sometimes leap to conclusions without having sufficient evidence to
And having those
it.
ideas challenged is hard, and it takes a long time to make that change. The last 2 weeks, we've had long discussions about a particular hot button topic that I don't want to bring up again because I don't want to get involved in another hot discussion.
Right.
We've beaten that dead horse. But the idea that I've always been taught this is what I've believed for however many years I've been alive, and now there's this other idea that might change my mind. The resistance to that is huge. Now, it's good in a sense because there are some opposing ideas you want to resist, like if somebody comes to you and says, there's really no gravity. It's just an illusion. You've been taught that your whole life. Here, let's go up on this cliff and I'll prove it to you. Okay, that would be a good time to tell that person they're a fool and push them to prove that they're a fool. Push them off a cliff. But there are so many things that are not necessarily the case. And it's your pride that keeps you from really seeing, okay, could there be another way to look at this?
Yeah, well, it's like what it's attributed to Mark Twain, although he's not actually the one that said it. But I can't remember the obscure person who actually did. I have it in my notes someplace. But the quote is, or the paraphrase of it, it's not the things that we know that's so much a problem, it's the things that we know that ain't so that's the problem. And that's what gets in the way. And like she said, pride. One of the hardest things to do is to impart new information or to get people to think in a different way, because pride immediately comes into play. One of the more effective teaching techniques to make use of is what's called the Socratic method. And the value of it is that it's a way of bypassing pride, because you lead people along by asking probing questions, which forces them to think through what it is that they think they believe. And as they naturally come across things that don't fit what they thought, they are more likely to go ahead and make the shift, because it's their own thinking that's doing it. They're doing it to themselves.
You let them think it was their idea.
Exactly.
And it's like, wow, I never thought of this before. Why did I? And then you're like, yeah, it wasn't just all you, dude. I asked you a ton of questions to get you
but
there.
see, the key thing here, if you're going to use the Socratic method, is you can't have pride yourself that you want them to acknowledge that, it's really...
It's like, wow, thank you for sharing this wisdom with me. I would have been lost my whole life if you hadn't told me this.
Yeah, see, you don't want to be in that kind of a thinking process.
Going back to our comment about video, video is not accurate.
Well, it's incomplete. It's
incomplete.
Yeah, that is
right.
It's incomplete information as you're seeing something from a particular point of view, which may or may not fully capture what's going on.
Right.
It's like a close-up picture of a whole bunch of people. You think there's a big crowd, but you pull back and it's just this little tiny group of people. You can depending on how you frame something, you can create. This background is not real. This is a green screen.
We are sitting in a library. Look, I'll pick a book off. Well, not now. They're dusty. I didn't dust them before the show.
Yeah, but it's a green screen.
Okay, for example, when we worked on our daughter's senior project, her their little film crew came to our church. Anyway, it was the end of a segment. Let me say something, then I'll come back to that.
Okay.
So JP said, this going back to video, someone once said, the advent of video has done an amazing job of hiding the truth. And ain't that the truth?
Yes, it does.
So
because as the way the human brain works, what we see takes precedence over just about any of our other senses. And so if we see something, well, then obviously that's the way it is.
In TV and movies, they use the lie of video all the time, but you don't realize it. So when we were filming here at the church, we didn't have a ton of extras. We probably had about 10 people maybe sitting, and they had to sit close to the aisle, and they ran the camera up the aisle, and so you only saw... you saw a bunch of people all sitting together, but we were really literally only 2 deep on either side of the aisle. There may have been a row or two that had 3, but we were all just sitting really tight. And, and another thing too, so when they film shows like Dr. Phil or Ellen, shows like that, sometimes they film 2 shows in a row. So what they'll do, they let you know when you're going to the filming that you're going to be there to film 2 shows. And then they seat everybody, and then the star of the show comes out, they do the whole show, the star goes back, changes clothes, and then they move people in the audience. So you may be on camera 4 or 5 times in the first show, you'll be on camera again another 3 or 4 times in the second show, but people don't recognize that it's the same audience because you're sitting in a different place. If they left everybody in the same place, you'd be like, I think that's the same audience. But your brain doesn't go there because it's different. So your brain goes, oh, 2 separate audiences. And you don't know that they filmed it in the same day, because studio time's super expensive.
Also,
so
if they have to refilm something, they want you to have the same reaction the second or third time as what you had the first time. And so you have to, as the audience, act.
I was acting. So yes, and it got to be really challenging when we were doing the filming because we had to look really sincere, and it was getting to be almost funny. So you had to like really like, oh yeah, I'm really sincere. By the way, their movie is up for a Global Film Festival award. So
Yeah, it's going to be at a film festival, and then
yes,
it's up for the best student film.
yeah. So anyway, so hopefully they win that. They're at least nominated. So our
Yeah.
daughter can put now on her resume that she's an award-nominated producer, and that hopefully they'll win, so she can put award-winning producer.
Right.
So that will help her resume because,
Yes.
well, it's really hard to get in the entertainment industry right now because entertaining is not happening in large
Yes,
groups.
COVID has really thrown a monkey wrench into
It
everything.
has. It has. So.
So, for instance, if you're going to do research, say you see a meme or something on Facebook, your first reaction to it should be, this probably isn't true. And actually, 9 times out of 10, you'll be absolutely right with that first reaction that's not true. But you should have in your head that there's a good chance this isn't entirely accurate, it's incomplete, or it's just flat out completely wrong. Then what you want to do is to do some research on it. And so what you want to do is try to drill down to a primary source. So if it claims that, so-and-so said this is a quotation from somebody. What you want to do is try to find out when and where they said it. That is, find the book, news article, something that gives you a specific location, time, date, all of that.
Right.
If you can't find that kind of information on it, that's a good clue that's probably not true.
Well, like in the words of Abraham Lincoln, things that are quoted on the internet might not necessarily be true.
Yes, but it's the other thing.
I wonder how many people saw that and didn't realize it was a joke and thought, oh, Abraham Lincoln said that? Well, that's cool.
Yeah, it's probably more common than you'd like to imagine. People are remarkably illiterate, given, they don't know much about history.
Yeah. Don't know much about algebra. I don't sing. Well, I do with small children. I don't
Yes.
sing for adults. That's all you're going to get.
But the other thing, too, is even if it is actually the quote from that person, you want to check the context, too. Because, is it the full quote, or are you getting, a sentence here and a sentence here jammed together?
Or even just that one sentence or that one paragraph completely out of context.
Right.
Now, we did have a comment, and I'm going to break our segment rule here, that video makes it harder to lie. No, actually makes it easier to lie. Because there's a lot of information out there that isn't true because the video's been taken out of context.
Right, you can take videos out of context very easily. That is, you get a sound bite. You just have the politician or whoever, and you just take the phrase or this little section that you want to pound them on the head with, and there you go. Yes, they said this, see? Well, what else did they say? What was going on when they said? You need the whole context, whether it's words on a page.
You have to have the context.
You have to have the context.
So,
context is critically important.
Videos made it easier to lie because people say, well, I saw it with my own eyes. Like the Nicholas Sandman, that's his name. Nicholas Sandman video. That was a lie the way that it was presented because the whole story wasn't told. Find People hoax, that's a lie because the whole story wasn't told. The whole context of the video is not there. There's so much. It happens all the time. Super easy.
And there is motivation for doing it because, see, this is the thing that we have to always be very careful about is that we have our preferred belief system, our preferred way of thinking about things. And so whatever confirms or seems to confirm what we already believe or think about someone or some situation, we just glom onto that and think, see, I'm right.
A good example, non-political, is Deflategate. People that love the Patriots were like, he would not do such a thing. And everybody else on the planet's like, yes, we got him now. Because people are going to root for their own team.
Yeah.
if
Sports
you,
is a good example. And politics and religion, the way people act in both of those things is very similar to the way sports fans behave.
Squirrel. Like literally, there's a squirrel. He just climbed up the tree. He's looking up there.
Yes.
Sorry.
But
Should close the
if
blind.
you watch, yeah, if you watch, if you're a really rabid fan of a given team, there is a tendency to always think that your team is right and the other team is wrong. And when the refs or the umpires say something contrary to what you would like to have happened, of course he was safe. No, he's out. We naturally want things to be in our favor.
And again,
dangerous.
empathy plays into it, because if you were a Patriots player, you would be like, oh man, we don't want this to happen, and the people on the other team were like, yeah. So if you imagine what it's like to be on the Patriots and to have this accusation going on, whether it's true or not, that's really hard. And so it will make you kind of back off for a minute and kind of wait till there's more data. And that's the thing. The more information about it, the better. And then be willing to go, okay, I was wrong. It really did happen, or it didn't really happen. But our pride just digs us in there.
And you want to
really tight.
When you're researching something too, besides trying to find primary sources, also try to find information from radically different points of view. Don't rely on just one viewpoint to say, okay, well, it's always, for instance, I use this example a lot in talking about how to do research by using a very bad example, somebody that couldn't do research very well. Book, The Coming Economic Earthquake, came out in the 1990s. And the author of that book, what was his
Larry
name?
Burkett.
Larry Burkett.
I remembered a name that you didn't
Thank
remember.
He simply, I became aware of the book because somebody gave it to me and said, this is a really good book. I read the book, and it was one of the worst books I've ever seen in my life, because I was a history major and took courses in economics, and so I'm reading this, and you have statements like one of them was when Nixon was president, he removed silver from our currency. And that was obviously not true, because I'm also a coin collector. 1964 was the last year that our coins had silver in them. That is, 1964 half dollar silver, 1965 half dollar nickel copper. Nixon didn't become president until 1969. He had nothing to do with the change in what the metals were that were used in our coins.
Does that have anything to do with economics, though, what you make your coins out of?
Well, I'm not sure.
Because, cavemen used pebbles.
Yes. But there are things like that. He claimed that Franklin Roosevelt had been influenced by John Maynard Keynes while Franklin Roosevelt was in college. The problem with that, though, is that Franklin Roosevelt was actually a little bit older than John Maynard Keynes, and so, a sophomore is unlikely to have been reading writings by John Maynard Keynes that he wouldn't produce for another, several decades. So just obvious historical errors, or talking about that the Kaiser had something to do with the inflation that afflicted Weimar Germany. The Kaiser abdicated after World War I. He was living in Holland. Again, he had nothing to do with the government of Weimar Germany. And it's just a whole series of errors like that.
Was there an economic earthquake? That's my question.
Yeah, it never happened
Okay.
either. So the book was wrong even there. But he was trying to argue that going into debt and that sort of thing was a bad thing for a country, just like it's bad for people. Well, duh. If you are in debt, you realize that it's not the best place to be.
He could have put out a brochure.
He could put out a brochure. He had a bibliography, and the bibliography, everybody that he, all his sources were from the exact same philosophical and political and economic point of view. And these people quoted from each other. So essentially he had one source for his book. Very bad research. If he just looked at an encyclopedia, he could have fixed some of his more egregious historical errors.
He would have been better off just doing a brochure.
He'd have been better off.
But he wouldn't have
brochure.
made as much money.
Yeah, he made a lot of money, and the book won awards. I have low opinions, therefore, of both the publisher of the book and the particular organization that gives awards to Christian books. So anyway, doing research is not hard in the sense that once you understand what you need to do, it's like, well, obvious. But people don't think in those terms. That is, they think in terms of, well, what's going to support my point of view rather than what is the actual truth. And see, that's what we have to get past, is thinking in terms of what's going to support my point of view and trying to find out what actually is the truth. And so finding primary sources, not somebody's interpretation of things, but watch or read the original source documents. So if you want to know about what's going on in the Constitutional Convention in the 1780s, all the people involved wrote a lot of stuff. Read what they wrote. That'll give you a lot more insight than just completely depending on secondary or tertiary sources. That is, when you're in school and you're taking a history course, what you're getting are third and fourth hand accounts of things. If you're going to be a historian, you need to go to the original source documents and look at those.
And I'm really pleased with our social studies book because it does talk about primary sources, and it reprints like the historical documents, and then it like translates them to things
Right.
kids can read. But okay, so we're at the end of a segment.
Okay.
And so JP said, and my Facebook feed was stuck. I didn't realize it, so I'm going to be backing up a little bit.
Okay, that's
He
fine.
said, that's why ninjas are so true. You can't see them. Don't know where that one came from, but like I said, my feed was stuck. Something I also had to tell my students was not to accept quote fragments. They needed to rely on full quotes in context. That's exactly right.
Yep.
Should we consider the past reliability of a source for information when considering present reliability, or is that an ad hominem argument? Should we consider only the immediate information presented to us in, say, an article, instead of considering how often they got something wrong in the past?
Okay.
So there's two questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Should we consider
Clarify.
the past reliability of a source of information when considering present reliability, or is that an ad hominem argument?
No, if you're in a court of law, they instruct the jury that, if this particular witness has lied, then you can pretty much discount anything that they say. Again, with any sources that you have to maintain a certain level of skepticism regardless. Now, there's a difference between lying and just making errors. It is, any source that you use, because it's produced by human beings, it's going to be less than perfect, which is why it's useful. Another reason it's useful to have multiple
Right.
sources.
And you have to keep it in the context of the time, too.
Right.
So I keep thinking about this mask argument that's going on with COVID. When, at the very beginning of COVID, we did not know what was in store for us. So we didn't know, will masks work, won't they work? So and we had zero research. Well, they kind of still don't have research on it. But, and then now we're farther down the line, and, the mask argument keeps going back and forth, wear them, don't wear them. But we know more about it now. So you have to take it in the context of the time, too. So
Now, information, that is, what you know at the beginning of a situation versus what you know at the end can be radically
hindsight
different.
being 20/20.
Yeah, hindsight's always 20/20, and so to criticize someone in the past for the choice they made based on the information they had at that time is kind of mean.
Right.
That is, they were doing the best they could. It's not that they purposely tried to screw things up, it's just they're human. This is the information they had, they made a choice. If it had been the right choice, they're a genius. They made the wrong choice, so they're a schmuck. No, They made a
Those are your
choice.
two choices. Be a genius or a schmuck.
Yeah.
Here's a new game show: genius or schmuck.
Yes. I mean, you don't know. You don't know that you don't know. And
Right,
so
you don't
do the
know what
best
you don't know
can.
until someone tells you. That's right. And like Maya Angelou says, you do the
Exactly.
best you can until you know better, and when you know better, do better.
Yeah. And so we should always be willing to say, okay, I was mistaken here. I have more information now. This is the way things
And you
seem to be
can't
based on what I
can't
can
judge
see now.
past behavior on present social mores.
Right. Because
So-
they didn't have the same perspective. They didn't have the same information. They were,
And the context of the situation is completely different.
Right.
We had this discussion the last 2 weeks that the topic I don't want to go back into.
Yes.
The social situation was completely different than it is now. So does that change our perspective on this behavior that was the topic of the two conversations? Should it? Does it?
yeah.
That's a discussion
Yeah.
that we've already
well,
had.
we talked
but
about with biblical interpretation, one of the difficulties that we have is a tendency to read into the text our own personal, the way things are today. And we forget that when we read the biblical materials, just like if you read a history book, you are going to a foreign place. That is, they are not the same people as we are. It's obvious with biblical materials because you're dealing with people that don't speak the same language you do. It's either Greek, Hebrew, or Aramaic, or the nation surrounding them, speaking Egyptian or Babylonian or whatever. They are, for the most part, I mean, it's an agricultural society. For some of the earlier sections of the Old Testament, you're in a Stone Age civilization, then you're in a Bronze Age civilization. Finally, during the time of David, you finally get to an Iron Age civilization, which is what it stays in through the New Testament. They are not technologically advanced. They don't have clocks. They don't have antibiotics. I mean, there's lots and lots and lots of differences. And if you don't keep those things in mind, that there are radical differences in their culture, how they run their governments, their societies, everything is radically different. It is not the same as us. And so that's going to have an impact then on how you understand what's there. You've got to look at it from the point of view of them. One of the easiest examples is to think in terms of the word earth. As a member of the 21st century in the United States, you hear the word earth, you picture a blue ball spinning in space. There is nobody in the Bible that would have had that image in their head because they never got to see the earth from
They
the
hadn't been to the
standpoint.
moon.
They hadn't been to the moon yet. They did not know what the earth looked like from the outside. Yes, they knew it was round, at least by the 500, 600s BC. Everybody knew the earth was round by then. But they still had no sense of what that would have looked like.
or even how big it
Or,
was.
yeah, they figured that out relatively early too, probably by the 400s.
But Columbus, he thought,
Well,
they
he-
didn't realize there was land in the middle between us and between them and China.
Columbus's idea, that is, he proposed something that ran contrary to consensus at the time. That is, everybody was pretty sure of how big the Earth was. He was arguing, no, it's smaller.
Oh, okay.
And the government of Spain decided to take the risk because the payoff would have been so good. But it was a risk. Because what he was suggesting about the size of the Earth didn't really seem right. No, from about 400 BC, I think, the first calculations on how big the Earth had been made. It's a matter of geometry and figuring it out. I can't remember it was a Greek guy that figured it out. He took a measurement from Alexandria and another measurement from in Greece, and from that he could figure out what the circumference was.
Oh, okay.
Because the stars shift.
Okay. It's math.
Yes, it is math.
Not a big fan.
But anyway, he came up
Not a
with.
fan.
He was pretty close to his. He didn't have as precise instruments as we have now, so his measurements are not as good as what they would become later. But he was remarkably close.
So JP had another question. Should we consider only the immediate information presented to us in, say, an article, instead of considering how often they got something wrong in the past? I think you're talking about the source material. Now, I had this come up with someone I was talking to, somebody who's very smart, very rational, a good thinker. I had a copy of an interview that I thought was really interesting, and I posted the interview. It was in the context of a controversial carrier of videos, let's call it that. And she automatically dismissed it because it was one of their videos.
Right.
And she doesn't agree with them because she thinks their stuff is really slanted, yada, yada, yada. But I said the point was the interview, not the frame, literally the frame around it. And the same exact interview was on YouTube. I was just too lazy to look for it. I just posted that. So I thought the interview was really very impactful.
Yeah.
But she got lost in the reliability of the source. But
Right. And that's one of the things, like if you are trying to share information with someone, see if you can find a more
neutral
source for the information.
Yeah.
Because that is going to happen. That is, people will react to something based on who it is that's carrying the information. That oftentimes is not a reasonable way of looking at it, because essentially what you're doing then is an ad hominem argument. That is, I'm not going to bother listening to you because you're ugly and your mother dresses you funny. That is deciding that you're not going to listen to information because it comes from person Y is not really necessarily a good idea, because you need to dismiss or challenge information based on the facts, the data, the arguments,
But-
not who it is that's
Right.
making the argument. That is,
The Bible even says truth can come from any source.
right.
So, like if
Balaam's ass was accurate.
So-
you don't normally listen to donkeys, but in that case, it was
Right.
a good idea.
Well, I mean, if Hitler came running in your house and said, your house is on fire, you're going to die, you should run out, be like, well, you're Hitler, you're a liar, you're an evil person, I'm staying put. If Mother Teresa walks in, your house is on fire, you need to escape, you're like, oh my gosh, it's Mother Teresa, she's looking out for my best interest, I will run outside. So either way, your house is on fire, and if you don't get out, you're going to die.
Right.
But, people are like, oh, it's Adolf Hitler, he must have
So it's
Nazis out there ready
automatically-
to kill me,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but there, like Robin said, when you're on a jury, they will tell you if this person says something that's not true, or they're holding information just so they can tell it in front of the jury. You can discount everything they say.
Right.
And so, and there was a time I was on a jury that the person was like this person's testimony directly contradicted this person's testimony. And it was actually a cop's testimony. And they asked us, do you automatically believe police officers? And my answer was, well, police officers are human, so I wouldn't automatically necessarily believe them just because they're a police officer, but if there's corroborating evidence, then yeah, I would. So anyway, a person who had nothing to do with the situation but had knowledge of parts of the evidence gave total, and this person had nothing to gain or lose by giving their testimony, and then the cop said something different. Then we were like, it was actually a hung jury because we didn't know, because we just think the cop gave incomplete information. If the cop had said that it took them a while to get into the car, then we would have been like, okay, it's the same as the locksmith, but it wasn't.
It wasn't compatible with the locksmith, who was an expert in these
Right,
sorts
and
of
had
things
dealt
like that.
with this door. And so it's not that we didn't believe the police officer, we just feel like his information was incomplete. And that's what we told the assistant district attorney when they talked to the jury after. He said, why couldn't you guys decide? And we said that was the key piece of evidence. If the cop had given more complete testimony that was corroborated by the locksmith, then we could have said, okay, the guy, because we were pretty sure the guy was guilty, but we had that reasonable doubt, and you can't violate that reasonable doubt. So there is credibility of the source that plays into it, but truth is truth. So if Hitler comes to you and says, don't jump off this cliff, you'll die because of gravity, and Mother Teresa comes to you and says, oh, go ahead and jump off the cliff, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry about the credibility of the source. I would just say that truth is truth. You're going to die if you jump off the cliff.
But thinking in terms of doing research, trying to figure out what is true, you know,
Right.
as far as what you see on the internet or wherever, multiple sources is something that you always want to do, and you want to get it from various points of view. For instance, there was this thing within the last 2 or 3 weeks of supposedly Bibles being burned by rioters in Portland or Seattle. The problem with it, though, is there was a single source, just one source for the information, and that source was Russian. And so the combination of the fact that it's a single source and this particular Russian organization is notorious for not always being particularly accurate made it very suspect. The Bible talks about that you can convict someone of a wrong deed on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. If you only have one witness, that's not enough. With academic or any kind of information, trying to find the truth about something, you need to have multiple sources. If it's just one source telling you this thing, and even if you, and see, this is where it gets a little fuzzy or can be hard to figure out, is that you'll have a whole bunch of people that will then quote this single source. And so that's why you always want to get back to the primary source. So if everybody is quoting just from this single source, you have no other sources of information, you need to be very skeptical. It may be true, but you have to be very, very
You have to
skeptical.
corroborate the evidence.
You have to corroborate the
We
evidence.
do that on the playground with children. He pushed me. I tripped. And then I'm like, okay, did you have any witnesses? Did you have any witnesses? And then sometimes you'll get a witness for the kid who was pushed that said, yeah, the kid did trip. And then you've got a reliable source now because he's the friend of the one who was pushed. But he's saying, no, I saw the kid trip and knock into him. So then you just go, okay, say you're sorry, blah, 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 life goes on. So, I mean, it takes an incredible amount of time to do all that.
And see, that's the other problem. This is why people don't do it, is because it does take some time and effort, and most people are very lazy, and so you don't want to bother to, you see something that supports your point of view, well, I like it because it supports my point of view, so here it goes.
Right.
People are lazy, they don't bother to check out information, and this is why there's so much misinformation available.
Now, there are times when, like, for example, if I have a question about something I don't have time to, like, research it, I'll ask him because I know he's well-read. He looks at all the